Have you ever guys wondered what will happen to our country 100 years later? Would you believe me if I told you that Rizal predicts the future? Bakit? Sino ba siya? Meron ba siyang kapangyarihan para alamin kung ano ang mangyayari sa hinaharap? Kaya samahan niyo kami at ipapakita namin sa inyo kung ano nga ba ang The Philippines a Century Hence. The Philippines a Century Hence, or originally known as Filipinas dentro de 100 años. It is an essay or article written by Jose Rizal to forecast the future of the country within 100 years depending on how both Spaniards and Filipino act. This was originally published in La Solidaridad of Madrid, running through the issues from September 1889 to January 1890. This essay supplements Rizal two great novels which are Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo, meaning that this essay helps to explain or expand more the themes or ideas that are evident in the novel, such as colonial oppression, the awakening of Filipino nationalism. This translation being used was done by Charles Derbyshire, who is the same person who translated Noli as the social concert and El Fili as the real. Now, let's proceed to the introduction made by Mr. Charles, where he used the Samoa Agreement to show the dangers of foreign intervention. On the left side, we can see that Charles criticizing President Benjamin Harrison on how the U.S. appeared weak and uncertain in its dealing with Samoa. This hesitation allowed stronger nations like Germany and England to dominate the situation. The United States seemed greedy even when it did not intend to. Robert Louis Stevenson support this by telling how European powers exploited and manipulated the U.S. nativity to divide and control Samoa, leaving the local population suffering. It is often cited in historical analysis of how smaller powers can be manipulated in international diplomacy. The supposed to be international agreement become a constant cause of international disagreement. On the right side of the slide, Mr. Charles connects this history to the Philippine situation, warning that the same pattern could happen again. Just as Samoa was entangled in agreements controlled by powerful nations, the Philippines could also be drawn into international agreements that threaten its independence. He believes that these so-called idealistic actions hide self-interest and can lead to a loss of sovereignty. Now let me introduce you to Jagore's prophecy, which prompted Rizal's policy of preparation for the Philippines. Theodore Jagor is a German traveler who spent several months in the Philippines around 1860s. Jagore's initial insights were based on direct on-the-ground experience, allowing him to document Filipino society, culture, economy, and colonial conditions. The result of that published as Risen in then Philippines. Rizal read the much better Spanish version of this while being a student at Ateneo de Manila. Jagore's prophecy basically furnished the explanation for Rizal's public life. Rizal, even as a young man, absorbed Jagore's warning about the consequences of colonial exploitation and societal stagnation. Later on, when Rizal studied in Berlin, he actually met Professor Jagor and they become a good friends. Taray, red strings, diba? Their friendship was rooted in sheer curiosity and concern for the Philippines, and they often discussed how the unfolding events in the island confirmed the predictions Jagor had made years earlier. After that, Rizal aimed to develop in Filipinos the same political acumen and foresight that he had actually cultivated through study, observation, and reflection. As a result of that, he republished Morga's history that is first published in Mexico in 1609 to recall their past. Noli Me Tangere painted their present, and El Filibusterismo sketched the future which continuance upon their then course must bring. And finally, the Philippines a Century Hence, which suggests the other possibilities and seems to have been the initial issues in the series of 10 which Rizal planned to print one a year to correct the misunderstanding of his previous writing which had been mispresented by Spanish censors. Pero teka nga, ang dami ko na sinasabi pero nasa introduction pa lang yun, no? Now to proceed to the essay itself, it is divided into 4 parts. Yes, 4 parts, kaya siguraduhin yung gising at nakikinig pa rin kayo. So with that, let's start with the part 1 of the essay which will be reported by Miss Regine Alban.
So today, I will be discussing the first part of the Philippines a Century Hence. In this part, Rizal Rizal explained the historical situation of the Philippines under Spanish rule, kung paano nagbago ang bansa, bakit ito humina, at bakit mahalaga balikan ang history natin. To foretell the destiny of a nation, it is necessary to open the book that tells of her past. So, ayon kay Rizal, hindi natin tunay na mauunawaan ang magiging kapalaran ng isang bansa kung hindi natin sisilipin at uunawain ang kanyang nakaraan. Mahalaga ang pag-aaral ng kasaysayan dahil dito natin makikita kung saan nagsimula ang ating mga kwento bilang isang bayan, ang mga sakripisyo, pakikibaka, pagkakamali, at tagumpay na humubog sa ating pagkakakilanlan. Para kay Rizal, ang kasaysayan ay parang isang aklat na nagsisilbing gabay. Kapag binuksan natin ito, mas nakikita natin kung bakit ganito ang kalagayan ng bansa ngayon at kung paano tayo makakagawa ng mas mabuting kinabukasan. Kung hindi natin aaralin ang nakaraan, mauulit lang natin ang parehong pagkakamali at mawawala ang mga aral na iniwan ng ating mga ninuno. The Philippines before Spanish colonization. Have you ever thought kung sino tayo o ano ang kalagayan natin bago pa man dumating ang mga Espanyol? Ano ang Pilipinas noon bago tayo tinuruan kung paano raw maging sibilisado? Bago tayo tinuruan kung ano ang tama at kung sino ang dapat nating paniwalaan? Ito ang gustong ipaisip ni Dr. Jose Rizal sa atin. Dang ito, hindi lang niya ikinuwento ang kasaysayan, ipinakita niya kung paano unting-unti naubos, nabura at napilitan ang ating pagkatao bilang mga Pilipino. Early Filipinos had organized barangays which were led by datos. So, bago pa man dumating ang mga Espanyol, maayos at maunlad na ang pamumuhay ng mga sinaunang Pilipino. Mayroon na silang sariling sistema ng pamahalaan na tinatawag na barangay. Ang bawat barangay ay pinamumunuan ng mga dato na nagsisilbing leader, mambabatas at hukom. Sila ang nagtataglay ng kapangyarihang magtakda ng mga batas at pagpatupad ng hustisya. At siya ang nagsisiguro na tahimik, ligtas at maayos ang kanyang nasasakupan. Kaya kung iisipin natin, hindi tayo basta-basta lang na walang direksyon. Mayroon na tayong organisadong lipunan kahit wala pang dayuhan. At ipinapakita nito na kahit bago pa man dumating ang mga Espanyol, ang mga sinaunang Pilipino ay may maayos na sistema. The Philippines already had active trade with neighboring countries such as China, Japan, Indonesia, and India. Noon pa man, bago pa tayo sakupin ng mga dayuhan, masigla na ang kalakalan sa ating bansa. Nakikipagkalakalan na ang mga sinaunang Pilipino sa mga karating bansa. Ibig sabihin, bukas na ang Pilipinas sa ugnayan at palitan ng produkto sa ibang kultura at bansa kahit wala pang kolonisasyon. Sa pakikipagkalakalan na ito, maraming produkto na ang ipinagpapalit. Ang mga Pilipino ay nagluluwas ng mga ginto, perlas at mga produktong gawa sa kahoy. Palit naman nito ay mga gamit tulad ng porselana, seda, bakal, armas at iba pang uri ng tela mula sa China at India. Dahil dito, malinaw na hindi likas na nahuhuli o napag-iiwanan ang mga sinaunang Pilipino. Marami na silang alam sa pakikipagkalakalan at may sarili na silang sistema ng ekonomiya. Mahalaga rin ang kalakalan na ito dahil hindi lang produkto ang naipapasok sa bansa, kundi pati ang mga ideya, disenyo, teknolohiya at kultura. Halimbawa, marami sa mga porselana at disenyo ang kagamitan sa sinaunang Pilipinas ay mga impluwensyang Chino. Maging ang ilang tradisyon at paniniwala ay naapektuhan din ng pakikisalamuhan natin sa mga karating bansa. So, sa kabuuan, ipinapakita ng aktibong kalakalan na bago pa dumating ang mga Espanyol, maunlad at konektado na tayo sa iba't ibang bahagi ng Asia. Pinatutunayan nito ang mga Pilipinas ay mayaman na sa kultura, ekonomiya at ugnayan bago pa man dumating ang mga panahon ng kolonisasyon. Ngayon naman ay tatalakayin ko ang early effects of Spanish colonization sa Pilipinas. Nagsimula ang kolonisasyon noong dumating ang mga Kastila mula 1521 hanggang 1565. Ang pangunahing layunin nila ay palawakin ang kanilang kapangyarihan, ipalaganap ang relihiyon at palakasin ang impluwensya nila sa buong kapuluan. So, isa sa pinakamalaking pagbabago na dinala nila ay ang Catholicismo. Malaking bahagi ng kanilang misyon ang pagpapalaganap ng relihiyong Katoliko, kaya nagpatayo sila ng maraming simbahan sa iba't ibang bahagi ng bansa. Dahil dito, halos lahat ng Pilipino ay na-convert at naging bahagi ng pananampalatayang Katoliko. Ang pagdating ng Katolicismo ay naging isa sa pinakamalaking pamana ng mga Kastila. Hanggang ngayon ay nakikita pa rin natin sa ating kultura, tradisyon at sa pang-araw-araw na buhay. Sa halong ito, ipinapakita ni Rizal kung gaano kalaki ang mga naging epekto ng kolonisasyon sa ating pagkakakilanlan bilang mga Pilipino. Ayon kay Rizal, unting-unting nalilimutan ng mga Pilipino ang kanilang mga tradisyon, kanilang mga awitin, ang kanilang mga tula, pati ang kanilang mga batas at aral na minanapa mula sa kanilang mga ninuno. Habang tumatagal ang pananakop, napipilitan silang talikuran ang sarili nilang kultura at tanggapin ang kultura ng mga Kastila. Pinaniwala kasi sila na ang kulturang Kastila ay mas mataas, mas sibilisado at mas tama kumpara sa atin. Dahil dito, unti-unting nawalan ang pagpapahalaga sa sariling wika at sining. Mas ginaya at pinuri ng mga Pilipino ang banyagang kultura hanggang sa maraming bahagi ng ating pagka-Pilipino ang hindi na ipasa sa susunod na henerasyon. So, pinapaalala sa atin ni Rizal ang kolonisasyon ay hindi lang nagbago ng pamahalaan o relihiyon. Binago rin nito ang puso, isipan at mismong pagkatao ng mga Pilipino. Ngayon naman, sa bahaging ito na sinaysay ni Rizal, pinapakita niya ang malungkot na kalagayan ng Pilipinas matapos itong mapasailalim sa pamumuno ng Espanya. Ayon sa kanya, nang maisama ang bansa sa pamamahala ng Espanya, unti-unting naging mahirap, nawasak at hindi na muling umunlad ang Pilipinas. Ang dating sagana at payapa na bansa nawala ng tiwala sa sarili, nakalimot sa kanyang nakaraan at hindi na alam kung ano ang patutunguhan sa hinaharap. Ipinapahiwatig din ni Rizal na nawala ang kakakilanlan ng mga Pilipino dahil sa matagal na pananakop, nasanay ng mga tao na sumunod na lamang sa mga utos ng mga dayuhan. Imbis na mamuhay ng malaya at may sariling kaisipan, ang kalayaan at tapang na dating taglay ng mga ninuno ay napalitan ng takot. Sa madaling sabi, gusto ipakita ni Rizal na dahil sa kolonisasyon, hindi lang ekonomiya at populasyon ng Pilipinas ang naapektuhan, kundi pati ang pagkatao at diwa ng mga Pilipino. Nawalan sila ng tiwala sa sarili at makalimutan ang tunay na halaga ng pagiging malaya. Pero sa kabila ng matinding pang-aapi, nagising muli ang kanilang tapang at pagmamahal sa bayan. Ayon kay Rizal, so many sufferings were tapped with insult and the lethargic spirit again became alive. So, ibig sabihin, dahil sa paulit-ulit na pang-aapi at pang-iinsulto, nagising muli ang diwa na tutulog sa mga Pilipino. Ang sakit at galit na kanilang naramdaman ay naging inspirasyon para ipaglaban muli ang kanilang dangal at kalayaan. Nagsimula sila mag-isip at magtanong, bakit ganito ang turing sa atin? Bakit tayo laging sumusunod? Dito nila na-realize na karapatan nilang ipaglaban ang sarili at ang bayan. Ang dating tahimik at takot na mga Pilipino ay napilitan ng tapang pagmamahal sa bayan at pagnanais na magbago. Ang sobrang pang-aapi at kawalan ng respeto ng mga Espanyol ang mismong dahilan kung bakit nagising ang mga Pilipino. Ang sakit at paghihirap ng kanilang naramdaman ay nagbunga ng pagkakaisa at tapang, at ito ang naging simula ng muling pagbangon ng bansang Pilipinas. Kaya masasabi natin na kahit sa gitna ng matinding pagsubok, ang pagkakaisa, tapang at pagmamahal sa bayan ang tunay na susi para sa pagbabago at kalayaan.
Ngayon, alam na natin ang buod ng kanilang nakaraan, alam na natin ang kanilang kasalukuyan, ngunit ano ang magiging hinaharap? Mananatili ba ang Pilipinas bilang kolonyang Espanyol? Hihiwalay ba ito upang maging malaya, pasailalim sa isang bansa o makipag-alyansa sa mga karatig na bansa? Mahirap sagutin ang mga tanong na ito dahil maaaring oo o hindi ang sagot, depende sa panahon na tinitignan. Kaya naman, ano pang hinihintay natin? Tayo na ay dumako sa ikalawang parte ng essay na ito.
Sa parting ito, mas pinili ni Rizal na suriin ang magiging kinabukasan ng Pilipinas, kung patuloy bang mananatili sa ilalim ng Espanya o magsisimulang lumaya ang bayan. Simulan natin ito. May tanong na ito ay nagsilbing pundasyon ng buong sanaysay ni Rizal. Hindi lang ito simpleng tanong, kundi isang babala at paalala. Sa pamamagitan nito, hinihikayat niya ang mga Pilipino na harapin ang totoo nilang kalagayan. Gusto niyang pag-isipan ng mambabasa. Kung magpapatuloy tayo sa ganitong buhay, anong klaseng kinabukasan ang maghihintay sa atin? Sinulat niya ito noong huling bahagi ng ika-19 na siglo. Sa panahon ng mas tumitindi ang pagsikil, pagtahimik ng mga reformista, at desperadong hinahawakan ng pamahalaang Espanyol ang kanilang kolonya. Sa ganitong konteksto, kitang-kita na mas malalim ang pag-aalala ni Rizal sa bayan. Ipinapakita ng tanong niya na alam niyang ang mahabang panahon ng kolonisasyon ay nagpalit ng tapang tungo sa pagsunod. Dito, inihambing ni Rizal ang dalawang uri ng Pilipino. Una, ang masigla at may pag-asa. Ang ating mga ninunong pinahahalagahan ang kalayaan. At pangalawa, ang mga nawalan ng gana at natuto na lang na mamuhay sa pagsunod. Sinulat niya ito para ipakita ang kolonyalismo ay hindi lang sumakop sa lupa, kundi sinakop din ito ang isip at loob ng mga tao. Ang unang henerasyon ay may alaala pa sa pagiging malaya at ang mga sumunod naman ay ipinanganak na nakagapos. Dito makikita ang psychological na pag-unawa ni Rizal na kapag paulit-ulit ng pang-aapi ay nagiging normal na lang ito. Tumitigil ang tao sa paghangad ng kalayaan dahil naniniwala siyang hindi ito posible. Nasulat niya ito matapos niyang pag-aralan ang lipunang Europeo kung saan ang ibang bansa ay lumalaban para sa reforma at katarungan. Ngunit sa Pilipinas, ang pagsunod ay naging tradisyon. Sa pasandating ng linyang ito, dahil pinakita nito ang mental at psychological na pagkakakulong na nakita ni Rizal sa mga Pilipino. Ang pamatok ay simbolo ng mahabang panahong kontrol ng mga dayuhan at ang mas nasanay ay ang pagpapakita kung paano binago ng kolonyalismo ang isip ng mga Pilipino mula sa paglaban tungo sa pagtanggap. Sinulat ito ni Rizal matapos niyang mapansin na maraming Pilipino ang takot sa otoridad. At kahit ang mga edukado ay nag-aalangang magsalita, alam niyang hindi ito likas. Itinuro ito sa kanila sa pamamagitan ng parusa, pagbawal magsalita, at takot sa pinalakas na relihiyon. Sa larawang ito, gusto niyang gisingin ang kanyang mga mambabasa na ang pagiging isinilang sa ilalim ng pang-aapi ay hindi dahilan para tanggapin ito habang buhay. At sa panahon ngayon, pinapaalala sa atin ng kanyang mga linyang ito na ang katahimikan sa harap ng mali ay nagiging ugali rin. Hinahamon tayo ng mga salita ni Rizal na kalimutan ang pagiging sunod-sunuran at ibalik ang tapang na taglay ng ating mga ninuno. Pinapakita ng bahaging ito kung paano nahahati ang katotohanan dahil sa pagkiling. Para sa mga liberal na Kastila, ay pag-unlad daw. Para sa mga praile, naligtas sa mga tao dahil sa relihiyon. Pero para mismo sa mga Pilipino, nakikita nila ang pagbulok ng lipunan. Ginamit ni Rizal ang pagkakaibang ito para ipakitang agwat sa pagitan ng nakikita ng mananakop at ang tunay na nangyayari. Para sa mga dayuhan, ang pagsunod ay kabutihan. Pero para sa inaapi, ito ay tanda ng paghina at pagkawasak. Sinulat niya ito bilang puna sa paraan ng Spanish Church at gobyerno na palaging binibigyang dahilan ang kanilang mga pamamahala. Kunwari sila ang mga moral na gabay pero sabay nilang pinipigilan ng edukasyon at kalayaan. Para kay Rizal, nagsisimula ang tunay na pagising kapag inuulit ng tao ang karapatan nilang tukuyin ang sariling moral na halaga. Dito, kinilala ni Rizal na ang pagtagal na Espanya sa Pilipinas ay hindi may papaliwanag ng lakas militar lang. Kaunti lang ang sundalo nila, may naugnayan sa Mexico, pero nagawa nilang mamuno sa loob ng maraming siglo. Binanggit niya ito para ipakita ang isang malaking kabalintunaan na ang tunay na sandatang ng Espanya ay hindi danas, kundi psikolohiya. Ito ay takot, relihiyon, at kontrol sa impormasyon. Ginawa ng simbahan na parang banal ang pagsunod at ang pagsuway ay naging kasalanan. Sa pag-unawang ito, ipinakita ni Rizal na nagtagumpay ang kolonisasyon hindi dahil malakas ang mananakop, kundi pinahina ang loob at pag-iisip ng mga sinakop. Basa niya ang teoryang pampolitika sa Europa at nakita niyang nabubuhay ang tiranya kapag ang pagsunod ay nagmumukhang pananampalataya. Inamin ni Rizal na mas malakas na ngayon ng Espanya, mas maayos ang barko, mas mabilis ang komunikasyon, at mas maraming troops o tropa. Pero tinawag niya rosy o maganda sa labas ang ganitong itsura. Paninin lang lamang. Bakit? Dahil ang moral na pagkabulok at kawalan ng hustisya ang tunay na pumapalibot sa pundasyon ng impyerno. Ipinakita ni Rizal na maaaring mukhang malakas ang isang bansa pero kung walang hustisya, tiyak ang pagbagsak nito. Sinulat niya ito matapos makita kung paano pinangako ang reforma pero bihirang ipinapatupad. Mukhang ang modernong gobyerno pero nananatiling walang boses ang mga tao. Dito, tinatalakay ni Rizal ang damdaming ugali ng Pilipino. Ipinapakita niya ang malay na Pilipino bilang sensitibo, tapat at handang magsakripisyo, pero madaling masaktan at palinlang. Hindi niya ito binabatikos. Ipinapaliwanag niya kung paano pinaglalaro ng kolonisasyon ang mga katangiang ito. Nangako ang mga praile ng langit, nagpakita ng maling pagkakaibigan ng mga Kastila. Ang katapatan ng mga Pilipino ay hindi dahil sa kahinaan, kundi dahil sa pag-asa. Mula sa humanistikong pananaw ni Rizal, nakikita niya ang kolonisasyon hindi lang bilang pampolitikang dominasyon, kundi panlilinlang sa moralidad. Kitang-kita ng kanyang malasakit, naintindihan niya kung bakit nanatiling tapat ang mga Pilipino, ngunit nagbabala rin siya. Ang ganitong bulag na katapatan ay nagiging panganib kapag nakabatay sa kasinungalingan. Ginamit na laban sa kanila ang kabutihan nila, ang pananampalataya at pagtitiis. Inilalarawan ni Rizal at sandaling paggising. Kapag hindi na kayang itago ng panlilinlang sa likod ng relihiyon o kapangyarihan, ang maskara ang simbolo ng pagkukunwari. Mga praile na nagtuturo ng kabutihan pero nananakit at mga namumuno na ng aangkin ng proteksyon pero umaabuso. Ito ang isang mahalagang punto sa sanaysay ni Rizal. Ang linyang ang maskara ay nahulog ay parehong makata at revolusyonaryo. Pinapakita nito na nagsisimula ng malinawan ang mga tao na ang pagkakaisa ay maaaring mabuo, hindi lang sa pag-asa kundi sa paghihirap ng pinagsaluhan. Dito ay pinakita ni Rizal ang kontradiksyon sa pagitan ng batas at hustisya sa ilalim ng pamumuno ng Espanya. Binanggit niya ang pagpasok ng penal code, tanda ng sinasabing reforma, pero tinawag niya itong walang kabuluhan dahil hindi ito tunay na ipinatupad. Ang pahayag na ito ay nagmula sa kanyang sariling karanasan. Nakita niya ang mga taong pinaratangan, pinatahimik o pinarusahan sa pamamagitan ng lihim na reklamo, kabilang ang kanyang kapatid na si Pasiano at marami pang mga reformista. Naintindihan niya na sa isang tiwaling sistema, ang batas ay madalas gamitin para kontrolin, hindi protektahan ng mga tao. Sa pagsasabing, ano ang silbi ng lahat ng batas sa mundo? Ipinapakita ni Rizal ang kawalang laman ng legalismo, kung walang moral na integridad. Sa ngayon, pinapaalala nito sa atin na walang silbi ang patakaran kung ang nagpapatupad nito ay di makatarungan. Ang tunay na hustisya, hindi nakasulat sa papel. Ito ay nakikita sa gawa. Ang babala ni Rizal dito ay parang propesiya. Gamit ang talinghaga ng batteries charging, inilalarawan niya ang lipunan na unti-unting nagiging tensyonado at mapanganib. Bawat kawalang katarungan ay nagdaragdag ng lakas sa darating na pagsabog. Hindi siya nananawagan ng pag-aalsa. Nagbabala siya na hindi may iwasin ito kung magpapatuloy ang pang-aapi. Ang mensahe niya para sa mga Kastila at Pilipino ay moral na paalala. Kapag sinupil ng pamahalaan ang katotohanan, iniluluwal nito ang sarili nitong pagbagsak. Ipinapakita ng rhetorical na tanong na ito ang realismo na tapang ni Rizal. Natatakot siya sa marahas na revolusyon pero alam niyang hindi maiiwasan ang galit ng taong pinahirapan magpakailanman. Hindi niya ito banta sa Espanya. Babala ito. Paalala rin ito sa mga Pilipino na ang makatarungang revolusyon ay hindi nagmumula sa galit, kundi sa sakit at pangangailangan na mabawi ang dangal. Sinulat niya ito matapos pag-aralan ang pag-aasa sa kasaysayan at nakita niya na bawat imperyo ay bumabagsak kapag nagising ang kanyang mga tao. Pinaalala sa atin ng linyang ito, ang tunay na lakas ay nagmumula sa pagkakaisa. Kapag tunay na nauunawaan ng isang bayan ang sariling paghihirap, nagiging layunin at lakas ito para sa pagbabago. Sa bahaging ito, ipinapakita ni Rizal ang kanyang pinakamalaking pananalig, ang kapangyarihan ng edukasyon at talino. Tinawag niya ang kaliwanagan bilang banal na apoy na hindi kayang patayin ang anumang tiranya. Sinulat niya ito habang nasasaksihan ang pag-usbong ng mga ilustrado, mga Pilipinong nag-aaral sa Europa at bumalik na may bagong ideya tungkol sa kalayaan at hustisya. Kahit sinubukan silang patahimikin ng sensura at pag-uusig, lalo lang tumibay ang kanilang mga kaisipan. Dito, tinutukoy ni Rizal ang pagsilang ng nasyonalismo. Hindi ito katulad ng persadong pagkakaisa ng mananakop. Ang pagkakaisang ito ay natural, nabuo mula sa pinagsaluhang sakit at pag-asa. Binanggit niya ang pag-usbong na isang nalinawan na henerasyon, mga palaisip at reformista, kasama na siya na nagsimula sa pag-ugnayan ng mga Pilipino sa iba't ibang isla at uri ng lipunan. Ipinapakita nito ang pagkakaunawa ni Rizal sa pagbabago ng lipunan. Kapag lumalayo ang kamalayan, unti-unting nawawala ang pagkakabahagi. Naniniwala siya sa pamamagitan ng edukasyon at komunikasyon. Muling matutuklasan ng mga Pilipino ang kanilang tunay na pinagkakakilanlan. Sa mga huling linyang ito, ipinapahayag ni Rizal ang kanilang propesiya at panawagan. Ipinapakita niya ang moral at intelektual na pag-unlad ng Pilipinas ay hindi maiiwasan. Hindi ito mapipigilan ng dahas. Balanse ang kanyang mensahe. Hindi niya pinapalakas ang digmaan, pero tinatanggap niya ito bilang posibleng bunga ng patuloy na pang-aapi sa pagbibigay ng pagpipilian sa Espanya, reforma o dugo. Ipinapakita ni Rizal ang kanyang karunungan bilang reformista at realist. Dahil dito, nagiging walang kupas ang sanaysay niya. Naniniwala siya na ang kasaysayan ay laging pabor sa kaliwanagan at kalayaan. Para sa mga Pilipino, ang mga salitang ito ay panawagan sa responsibilidad. Ang kalayaan ay hindi lang pangarap, kundi tungkulin na pinapalakas ng edukasyon, pagkakaisa, at moral na lakas. Kaya sa pagtatapos ng part 2, bumalik tayo sa unang tanong ni Rizal. Ano ang magiging kinabukasan ng Pilipinas sa loob ng isang siglo? Sinagot niya ito hindi sa prediksyon, kundi sa layunin. Paalala na ang kapalaran ng bayan ay nakasalalay hindi sa pinuno, kundi sa tapang ng mamamayan na mag-isip, kumilos, at mangarap.
Now, let's talk about Chapter 3. In this chapter of The Philippines a Century Hence, it tackles how Rizal presented a penetrating analysis of the Filipinos' evolving social awakening during the late Spanish period. This awakening, he argues, was not born out of rebellion but the natural consequences of education, exposure to liberalism, and the Filipinos' growing knowledge and awareness of their own collective identities. First question in this chapter was, how can reform succeed in the Philippines? He said that if the Philippines has to remain under the Spanish rule, she must be transformed politically as demanded by the course of her historical evolution and the needs of her inhabitants. Jose Rizal believed that the people were slowly changing. People had become more educated and more aware. And because of that, the old Spanish ruling that is controlling and abusive could no longer continue. And Rizal was warning the Spaniards that if they refused to listen and adapt, if they stayed stubborn, deaf to the people's cries and worries, and unwilling to change, then its control over the Philippines would eventually fail. What Rizal was trying to say is, you can't expect a child to act like an adult who already knows everything, and vice versa. You cannot treat the Filipinos like a child if they have already grown up. If Spain wants to keep ruling fairly, it has to change its ways and respect the progress of the Filipino people. With Rizal's question in mind, we ask up to this present time, how can reforms truly succeed or happen if the government does not change? Although some governors, some peninsulars have realized this truth. Hence, some laws which are good in themselves but which are not carried out through the lack of solid basis and because they are not the natural outcome of their social needs. There were a few Spanish officials that did understand that the Philippines needed real change. Some even tried to create and pass fair laws. But Rizal criticizes how these quote-unquote supposedly good laws failed to take root because they lack a solid basis. In a much more better understanding, these laws are what we called just because or basta-basta lang without a concrete understanding of what the people actually need. Rizal believed that these changes or transformation would be violent and fatal if it originated from the mass, but peaceful and rich when it came from the upper classes. When change comes from the people, it will be violent, but if it comes from the educated and powerful, like the government or the upper classes, it will be peaceful as authority can introduce reforms wisely. Because to be honest, whether Spain likes it or not, Rizal was trying to say, if you don't give real reforms from above, the people below it will arise and it will be bloody. Reforms will succeed only if they come from sincere intention, grounded in justice, and supported by education and public awareness. This is the part where Rizal compared the Spanish government to a physician who doesn't know how to cure cancer. What he meant was that the government kept implementing and applying these temporary remedies like a palliative character instead of curing the real disease of a society, such as corruption, injustice, and the abuse of power. Just like a physician who only covers a wound without treating its cause. Rizal believed that it will only make it worse if the government does not fix the real underlying issues in the society. Real change is necessary as the Philippines cannot stay the same forever. The lesson? Don't give empty promises but solve real issues like injustice and abuse. But in all honesty, Rizal was actually impressed by the ideas of the Spaniards. He admired those principles because it showcased justice and progress. All of the liberal ideas, such as the form of freedom in the press, equality before the law, and education for all. However, it also disappointed him as these great ideas were never carried out. It only remained in words and no sincere actions were ever made in the Philippines. So I can say, or we can say, that the Spaniards said, okay, we'll give you freedom of speech, we'll improve schools, we'll make justice fair. But after saying it, they never really do it. Or if they do, it's only halfway without finishing or having real results. Pangako gusto pero to pa rin ayaw. Aray ko! This is the part where Rizal used a reference from Miguel de Cervantes' satire novel entitled Don Quixote to throw shade at the Spanish colonial government. The reference comes from a very famous Spanish novel. In this story, Don Quixote's funny and loyal companion, Sancho Panza, is promised to be the governor of a fictional island called Insula Barataria. When Sancho finally becomes governor, a man named Dr. Pedro Recio is assigned to take care of him. But instead of letting him eat normally, Pedro keeps stopping him from eating anything, giving all sorts of silly excuses like, don't eat this, governor, or don't eat that either, as it's not proper for the governor to eat such a thing. This is where Rizal compared the Spanish colonial government to the crazed Dr. Pedro. Rizal pertained that the Spanish authorities were showing fake acts of care to the Philippines, when in reality they were just hindering the Philippines from growing or enjoying the benefits of progress, just like how the doctor prevented Sancho from eating and in the long run got starved. Rizal wittily mocked the Spaniards by using Cervantes' satire novel to expose their hypocrisy and absurdity to the Philippines. Rizal used this to make a serious point. Spain pretended to care for the Philippines, but in reality, they never cared for the Philippines and for its people. They limited the abilities of the Filipinos to grow and instead became dependent and weak to the Spaniards, just like how Sancho was starved. But the question is, how can reforms actually succeed in the Philippines? As I've mentioned, for reforms to succeed, the government itself must sincerely lead the change, not wait until the people are forced to revolt. Because reforms must be intentional, not forced by anger or pressure. And a nation cannot reform if its people remain uninformed, uncritical, or even fearful. That's why we have education, free press, and that's the next subtopic that we will talk about. How was the free press during the Spanish period? Rizal wrote, but routine is common to many governments, and routine says that the freedom of the press is dangerous. During Rizal's time, the Philippines had almost no press freedom, and if there were few newspapers that, let's say, nakaligtas or escaped, it was usually proofread or tightly watched by censors. Writers and editors could be punished if they have written anything anti-Catholic or anything against Friar. And we cannot forget that Rizal, Del Pilar, and Lopez Haina had to go outside our country and go abroad just to publish freely. Because ironically, in Spain, liberal newspapers were discussing freedom and equality, and yet in the Philippines, it could get you banned. Worse, executed. Hashtag double standards yarn. On the next slide, this is the table that compares the advantages in Rizal's view and the disadvantages the government's fear. For Rizal, having a free press lets truth reach both rulers and the ruled. But the government's fear, it might cause rebellion or spread dangerous ideas. But Rizal clarified that these disadvantages would only trigger the corrupt rulers. For honest governments, free speech is criticism and strength, not a threat. Just like what the song says, bato-bato sa langit, matamaan, wag masyadong halata. Rizal fought for a free press. It is just not a mere newspaper or diario. He was fighting for the people's rights to think and question the truth. But moving on, what was the Spanish Cortes? And why was Philippine representation needed? A Spanish Cortes are Spain's national parliament, a legislative body of elected delegates. They functioned like the Congress in modern government. It was the lawmaking body where representatives debated and approved laws for the entire Spanish empires, including its colonies such as the Philippines. But during the time of Rizal, the Philippines did not have any representatives. Rizal believed that by having Filipino delegates in the court, we will have the right to voice out the needs and rights of of the Philippines directly to the Spanish government, because at that time it was really a big deal. It would mean a lot and promote equality. Rizal explained that a representation in the Cortes was just not a privilege, but rather it was a right and necessity. Freedom brings duty. Citizens must use their rights for the common good, not for selfish gain. Unfortunately, there's a but in this situation. As much as Rizal wanted a Filipino representative in the Spanish court, Rizal was also warning or describing the dilemmas these Filipino representatives would face if they were sent to the Spanish court. He was just saying that the colonial system was so deeply unfair that even if the best Filipino representatives would be set up to fail. He specifically pointed out 3 dilemmas: the lack of respect, the Filipino representatives may not act freely, and forced to become a political trimmer. In the terms of lack of respect, Filipinos in Spain were not treated as equal, that even if they were elected as representatives, their voices would be ignored, undermined, or even mocked. But when a Filipino is too bold, they will be punished. But if a Filipino is too meek, they will be dismissed. So, saan lulugar ang mga Filipino, right? And for the dilemma that the Filipino representatives might be forced to become political trimmers, a political trimmer is someone who tries to please both sides. This is not out of dishonesty, but because they are trapped. And a Filipino in the Cortes might try to please a Spanish politician to avoid backlash. But a Filipino in the Cortes might also try to please Filipinos by pushing reforms. But in the end, all just boils down that if you speak honestly, you will get silence. And if a Filipino representative speaks boldly about abuses, Spain could expel them from the Cortes, censor them, imprison them, and even accuse them of sedition. So there was no safe space to tell the truth, because honesty equals to punishment, but silence equals to uselessness. This was the dilemma. This was the part that made me more amazed of how Rizal can write and express his thoughts. He wrote that since the Filipino is regarded as a fit citizen when he is asked to pay taxes or shed his blood in defense of the fatherland, why must this fitness be denied him when the question arises of granting him some right? Beautifully said. This was Rizal's way to expose the double standards of the Spanish rule. Filipinos were only considered good enough pag nagbabayad ng tax. Filipinos were only considered good enough if mamamatay sila sa isang gera, because it would benefit Spain's needs. But the Filipinos are useless when asking for their rights. Walang kwenta pag nagsimula na mag-ask sa isang karapatan naman ng isang Pilipino. So it is only natural for Rizal to demand a Philippine representation in the Cortes. If we were a part of Spain's government, then we should have had a voice in how we were ruled. This part is all about education. Why was reform in education important? The 2 fundamental reforms without which all others would be illusory and uncertain are the representation of the Philippines in the Cortes and the secularization of the parishes. These are the sine quibus non, the indispensable conditions of every progress. The Latin phrase sine quibus non simply translates to without which nothing. By mentioning this phrase, Rizal was saying these 2 reforms are crucial and without them, no true progress is possible. He was also saying that all of the reforms, minor laws or policies that the Spain have imposed would be useless or illusory if these 2 reforms weren't made. If we can serve and sacrifice for our country, then we also deserve to think for ourselves, to learn, and to be treated as equal. He argued that there is no valid reason to keep the Filipinos in the dark, ignorant, or uneducated. He found it completely idiotical that the Spanish would wanted Filipinos to pay taxes, but considered them unfit when it comes to their rights like education and representation. A reform in education is important because ignorance keeps a person enslaved. Being educated was the only thing or only chance the Filipinos could have that Rizal saw. And this is not just about education Rizal was pointing out, but he was defending the intelligence and dignity of the Filipinos, because a true government would educate its people, not exploit their loyalty. Filipinos were never ignorant. They were made ignorant by being denied their right to proper education under the Spanish rule. Kaya sa panahon ngayon, ang hirap maging mangmang, walang muwang sa realidad at sa ginagawang pang-aabuso ng gobyerno. Ironically, it has always been like that back then in Rizal's time. You can't really blame Rizal for holding on to education like a lifeline, as it is really the best weapon against manipulation and injustice. And since injustice is mentioned already, why is it the foremost virtue of a civilized nation? And what did Rizal mean? Rizal wrote, "Injustice excites the weakest to rebel," emphasized that even the weakest or the most patient ones will eventually fight back if they are treated unfairly for too long, because justice serves as the balance of society. We can't allow all of the wrongs to dominate and destroy what's good. It is a normal human reaction. If you continue to be unfair, don't be surprised when the people you look down on finally stand up against you. Rizal reminds us that injustice will always awaken resistance. For Rizal, a nation cannot call itself civilized if it denies justice to its people. He said that injustice was Spain's greatest sin in the island. But what is a competitive examination, and why is it important back then? An exam where it is about meritocracy, positions in the government should be earned through ability, knowledge, and moral work. Rizal favored this exam for government service because they reward talent rather than connection. They prevent corruption. They prove that Filipinos are equally capable if given fair opportunity. Rizal also asked, how can the human will and conscience bring effective reform? Rizal believed that reforms begins not in decrees but in conscience, with the human ability to tell what's right or wrong and the willpower to act upon. Spain ignored the will and conscience of what the Philippines can offer and answered it with oppression. Rizal was just simply reminding Spain that the Philippines had always been loyal. Even during the time when Spain was weak and struggling against the Napoleonic yoke, Filipinos stayed faithful and still obeyed the laws. Rizal was simply saying, what crime has the Philippines committed that she should thus be deprived of her rights? Because personally, loyalty without justice is just slavery. The Philippines didn't rebel. She only fought for friends. Mean Spanish or not? Rizal didn't directly answer, but he gave Spain a choice. Spain will try to listen and respect the people. The Philippines might stay under its flag peacefully, but if Spain continues to govern with abuse and treat the islands merely as a source of wealth and power, then separation is inevitable. Rizal means that if Spain continues to treat Filipinos incorrectly and ignores change, then no matter how loyal Filipinos are, a rebellion will rise. And in this last subtopic of chapter 3, Rizal used or mentioned Niccolo Machiavelli, the great reader of the human heart. He said, "It is human nature to be bound as much by benefits conferred as by those received." We humans usually crave that sense of connection, that approval, and that kind of gratitude that comes with kindness. We are attached to doing good and receiving. The mutual exchange of kindness creates emotional bonds and obligation that both have a positive influence or induce power dynamic. Through Machiavelli, Rizal was showing that people are bound by mutual benefits and moral exchange. Have you ever had this feeling, or maybe dream, that you're falling into this deep, dark, and bottomless chasm, like a sort of abyss? Because Rizal wrote that it is necessary that fear should not deter us, but let us enter freely the abyss to probe its terrible mysteries. This was Rizal's call for courage. He uses Greek mythology before entering the underworld. People offered a small handful of earth to the three-headed god Cerberus. Rizal was simply saying, let us not be afraid to look into the future, even if it's dark or dangerous. Understand its risk and face it with open eyes. We should not fear the unknown. Face the challenges bravely and seek wisdom. Only by looking into the abyss can a nation find wisdom and direction.
At para naman sa ika-apat na bahagi ng essay na isinulat ni Dr. Rosario, nati ko rin siya sa apat na part base sa aking pagkakaintindi. So the first part is the inevitability of change. This message was given a strong emphasis in the introduction of the fourth part of the essay. Inevitable means it is uncontrollable. It is something that no one can prevent from happening. Kahit anong gawin natin mangyayari. To use it in a context regarding the main discussion of the essay, Filipinos will seek their independence as it is natural for someone who has their own identity. So, dun sa essay, ito yung inevitable. Aside from change is inevitable. Hindi natin mapipigilan na magkaroon ng pagbabago. The fact that the Filipino has their own identity, hindi nakuha ito ng mga Spaniards. Therefore, the inevitable here is that Filipinos will rise, will learn, will be aware that they have to stop, take back their country. No one in captivity will let the individual who had put them in this captivity take over their whole identity. Therefore, this matter regarding inevitability is rooted in identity, which the Spaniards, just like what I have said, failed to take from the Philippines at the time of their colonization. So, isa sa mga excerpt na kinuha ko, this, the existence of a foreign body within another endowed with strength and activity is contrary to all natural and ethical laws. Science teaches us that it is either assimilated, destroys the organism, is eliminated, or becomes insistent. Aristotle used this metaphor to introduce the first two predictions that he had for the Philippines, which are either to be totally absorbed by the influence of the Spaniards and become one of theirs, or to fight back against their forces and face destruction of the land and people of our nation at the time. In this phrase, it is indicated that two entities should not and cannot be together within one body. One has their own mind, and the other one as well is capable of thinking and deciding for themselves. Therefore, the Philippines and Spain coexistence due to the oppression of the Spaniards, it's not natural, and it defies all natural, moral, and ethical laws. So this law of destiny can be opposed neither Spanish patriotism nor the love of all of the Filipinos for Spain, nor the doubtful future of dismemberment and intestine strife in the islands themselves. Destiny or not, the control of the Spaniards over the Filipinos is expected to end. It might have taken hundreds of years for their colonization. To the end of the day, it was still bound to happen as it is the natural order of things. Spain cannot keep up the control over the Philippines as they have failed to provide the only thing that could have challenged the law of destiny that we are talking about, and that is to give the Filipinos the reforms they were asking for, compromise, and to try coexisting at least. And since they continue, the Spaniards continues to deprive us of our natural rights in life, it is also normal for the people of the Philippines to mature and to think and to realize that we deserve better, and we will attain this better life ourselves without the influence the Spaniards are trying to shove into our lives. Since we are an independent, we have our will, we are capable of thinking for ourselves. So according to the excerpt, no amount of Spanish patriotism, the strength and love of Spaniards for their empires is enough to stop the forces of destiny from reverting what changes they have done to its original and natural state. As Filipinos will think, and no one can stop them from fighting for themselves once they know what they deserve, what they truly deserve in life. Second thing that was mentioned in the excerpt is that Filipinos who had alliances and relationship with the Spaniards will suffer the consequences of betraying the motherland. They cannot put a hold on what is bound to happen. Hindi rin ito mapipigilan ang majority ng mga Pilipino na lumaban opposing the Spaniards. And lastly, the doubts of these colonizers that are lingering as to who will be there to control the Filipinos once they have lead themselves. Once na makalaya tayo na lang mga Pilipino ang naninirahan sa bansa at wala na mga Espanyol. Iniisip na mga Espanyol noon according to Rizal's prediction, mga Pilipino ito, hindi nila kaya pamunuan mga sarili nila. Magkakaroon din sila ng kaguluhan dahil hindi sila magkakaroon ng magkakaunawaan dahil ito sa katotohanan ang bansa raw natin ay isang archipelago. Hati-hati ito sa mga isla at kada isla may mga mamayan, may mga grupo ng mga tao na mayroong sariling paniniwala, practices, kultura that sets them apart from one another. So these differences divides us according to the Spaniard, and these differences will affect us. This will prevent us from being progressive. Aristotle denies that this possibility will stop the Philippines from getting herself back, as destiny is destiny and no one can defy its forces. What Spaniards failed to do that led to the development and fulfillment of the mentioned law of destiny is number one, hindi tayo napigilan ng mga Espanyol na maging mangmang dahil kalaunan ay narealize natin sa mga sarili natin na hindi ako papayag na ganito lang. Noong mga panahon na yon, marami ng mga Pilipinong nag-aaral, yung mga ilustrados just like Jose Rizal that are helping our people to realize that you do not have to follow the Spaniards just so that we could leave. The second one is keeping the Filipinos in a poverty state. Hindi rin tayo napigilan ng mga Espanyol na magtrabaho, matuto at kumita ng pera. Lastly, exterminating the Filipino race to hinder their progression. Hindi tayo matatanggal ng mga Espanyol sa Pilipinas dahil tayo ang kayamanan nito. Tayo ang pinaka-pinagtaan ng mga Espanyol na yun dahil tayo ang gumagawa ng trabaho nila at yun ay ang pag-exploit ng resources ng bansa. So, sa tatlong ito walang nagawa ang mga Espanyol, therefore, nandito tayo gaya ng prediction ni Jose Rizal, Malaya, at walang namamunong foreign country. So, the topic 1.2 is the main predictions that were tackled in the essay. So, the first one is that the Philippines under the rule of the Spaniards. Iniisip ni Jose Rizal, ina-anticipate niya na after the hundreds of years of colonization that we were under on, magiging province tayo ng mga Espanyol since hindi tayo nakalaya. Which is na Filipinos and and Spaniards coexisting in the Philippines could have been a possibility if only Spain had provided reforms and changes that will give equal power, opportunity, rights, recognition, education, and capacity. In essence, the equality of being a cohabitant in an area. No one is greater or lesser. This could have been the outcome of the centuries of colonization by their people if reform was given to ours. The second one is that the Philippines Declaration for Independence, revolution leading to destruction. Kung hindi tayo bibigyan ng mga pagbabagong hinihingi natin, tayo mismo ay lalaban. At kahit lumaban tayo, matatalo tayo dahil mas malakas ang forces ng Spaniards at the time. Pero at least, lumaban tayo. We have dignity. We have a backbone. So, another excerpt just so that we could elaborate this second prediction. Hatred and resentment on one side, mistrust and anger on the other, will finally result in a violent and terrible collision, especially when there exist elements interested in having disturbances so that they may get something in the excitement, demonstrate their mighty power, foster lamentations and recriminations, or employ violent measures. For this reason, the Filipinos will awaken and realize the fact that it was never for them in the first place. All the Spaniards have done is for their merit. They will be punished if they disobey. That punishment is not out of love, it's not out of care and willingness to teach the Filipino people to be one of them. It is an act to terrorize us, to violate us, and to inflict fear on our fellow men. Fear and anger are the driving powers as to why the Philippines will stand up from this seat and declare their independence. A foreigner cannot rule a different race as they are not one. They do not think, look, or act the same. Nga, we are two entities. We have our own identity. Therefore, the treatment that our people would have gotten if we had let their people take over our own land without calling for reform, at least would have been devastating to our blood and identity. Hinayaan at hindi natin napigilan ang colonization ng mga Espanyol sa ating bansa. To this very day siguro, tayo ay inaalipin ng mga ito. Another excerpt. But in countries ruled by a foreign nation, the most justly severe measure is interpreted as injustice and oppression because it is ordered by a foreigner who has no sympathy with or is an enemy of the country. The denial of change and opportunity for equal standing is the very reason as to why our people might or will call for our own independence once we are given the opportunity to fight back, according to one of Rizal's predictions. And in this prediction, Rizal anticipated the course of action that will arise if this possibility occurs, that the Philippines will lose. The motherland will face a catastrophic event that will damage its state, lives will perish, and those who are stronger will win. But the weak who were beaten never lost at all because they fought until the very end. They never gave in to the oppression. They might have lost the war itself, but they will be remembered as the ancestors of the land that never ran away from the hardship, from the pain, and the people who protected the country and their country. The last prediction that Rizal had anticipated is that a stronger nation will colonize again the Philippines after removing the power from Spain. The possibility of a stronger nation from European countries or even the United States of America overthrowing the control of Spain in the Philippines was one of the most probable outcomes of all of these things in the history of our nation. Bakit? It is because even if the Filipinos overpowered the Spaniards, which was unlikely to happen at the time, gaya na sabi natin, mas malakas sila, give natin yun, we will still suffer a great loss in that battle. And we do not have the adequate resources to recover quickly our motherland. And aside from that, we have always dismissed the ideas of the Spaniards. And therefore, our own and old ways of governance will just resurface. No autonomous body of governance is ruling our people. We cannot rule ourselves at the time yet. Therefore, a stronger country most likely will take this opportunity to take over and control our lands for military, economic influence, and other opportunities that will benefit them during this time of battle for glories and territories of larger nations. For the 1.3 topic, Republic, Federalism, Self-Governance. By a law of reaction, the islands will probably declare themselves a federal republic. It is mentioned in one of the passages in the essay that we Filipinos will incorporate federalism in our nation to govern ourselves. What and why federalism? Federalism is a form and approach in governing wherein the power is decentralized within different states or provinces within one nation. These clusters are under one official governing body. However, all are capable of governing themselves. This came to mind for Rizal, and he anticipated that we will follow such an approach in our government because the Philippines is an archipelagic country. It is divided by thousands of islands, and each island has its own different communities. The purpose of this is to ensure sure that all of us will be seen and heard. And that division will not be the root as to why Filipinos will fight one another for power and control. With federalism, control and authority will be properly divided, and at the same time, it is still under the national government that overlooks all of the regional or state governments. And for the last subtopic, 1.4, foreign powers and global context. If the Philippines secure their independence after heroic and stubborn conflicts, they can rest assured that neither England nor Germany nor France and still less Holland will dare take up what Spain has been unable to hold. So bakit hindi tayo kukunin or sasakupin ng mga bansang ito? Europeans are busy with Africa, colonizing Africa. The same thing with England, with India. Germany naman, they will have complications with other stronger countries. France was with China, Poland is with Moluccas and Java. Other greater and stronger nations will not take their interest in the archipelagic and small land of the Philippines as they have their own reasons, most of which are based on the fact that they are already preoccupied with their own colonization of other countries that they deem as more resourceful and beneficial to put a hold on compared to the Philippines. On the other hand, the United States of America may have the same reasons, but Dr. Jose Rizal believes that since the Americans are considered as one of the strongest colonizers at the time and they have a direct conflict with the Spaniards, they will seize this opportunity to expand their influence on the Pacific for military merit in the premises of Southeast Asia. It was the pride and the price that made the Americans take over the control of the Philippines from the Spaniards. Why did Rizal consider the foreign powers and global context in anticipating the future of the Philippines? It was because the Philippines is a separate country. Lahat naman tayo ay kanya-kanyang bansa, but it is not unreachable, meaning we are still interconnected from one another despite the fact that we are one country from one another. We are reachable from the control of other influence by other countries. In order to predict what might happen, one must consider all the dynamic changes and interconnectedness of all variables. And at the same time, everything is constantly changing and connected to each other. India is with England. England does not want to interfere further with the conflict for the Philippines between Spain and the United States of America, as they have already established their forces in the Indian Empire. If they did, the Americans could have switched their forces that are focused on the Spaniards who are colonizing the Philippines at the time to the British military acquiring the resources in India, spices in India. So it's like a game of chess. Everything and everyone needs to be strategic as all of us are a part of it. Those who are strong will prey on those who are weak for power, control, and influence, while those who are weak will retaliate. We will fight back and we will lose and we will recover for another fight to gain our liberty, independence, freedom, ourselves. History does not record in its annals any lasting domination exercised by one people over another of different race, of diverse usages and customs, of opposite and divergent ideals. One of the two had to yield and succumb. To sum up, knowing our history is a guide to not let things happen again. Knowing what it was like then will guide us to do better, to be better. This essay by Jose Rizal means that we Filipinos at all times must be vigilant against foreign control and that we should create a better relationship with each other, as our division, the division of our people, will be the very reason for another interference of another race ruling our lands. When one is not capable of leading themselves, they act with no thinking, no rationality. It is pure chaos and it is a form of weakness that will get the attentions of those who want more, which Dr. Rizal was afraid from, which actually happened when the Americans took over the control from the Spaniards.
Sums up all of our reports from Group 1 until our group, naway manatili sa ating alaala na hindi lahat ay natulog sa madilim na panahon ng ating mga ninuno. May mga nagbantay, lumaban, nagpaalab ng diwa ng pag-asa at pagbabago. Tulad noon, ang Pilipinas ngayon ay may sariling laban sa korupsyon, maling impormasyon, nahirapan, mabagal na ustisya at pagkalimot sa tunay na kasaysayan. Kapag hindi tayo nagiging madali para sa mga may kapangyarihan na ulitin ang mga maling pamamalakad na minsan nang nagdulot ng sakit at kadiliman sa ating bansa. Kaya ang tanong ko sa inyo ngayon, tayo ba ay gising o tumutulog muli habang dahang-dahang nauulit ang mga pagkakamaling nagdaan? Huwag nating hayaan ang sakripisyo ng mga nagpatunay na gising na ang bayan ay mauwi lamang sa pagkalimot. Mula sa mga kabataan hanggang sa mga nakakatanda, tungkulin nating maging mapanuri, maging boses ng katotohanan at kumilos hindi lamang para sa sarili, kundi para sa kinabukasan ng bansang patuloy na nangangailangan ng pagbabago. Muli, kami po ang huling pangkat at maraming salamat sa inyong pakikinig.